This lecture will focus on lexical resource, and we're going to be thinking about some common but it seems to be in part 2 that most students tell me that they struggle with their vocabulary. Now, you need to remember that with vocabulary, it is not just about range. Students all the time, almost the number one thing that they tell me that they would like to improve is their vocabulary. They always tell me, oh, I need a wider range of vocabulary. This is often not exactly the more vocabulary to communicate ourselves with more clarity. Now, of course, building your vocabulary range is useful and continue to do that. I suggest you do. But at the same time, do not forget the importance of accuracy when it comes to vocabulary. That lexical resource score is not only about the range of your vocabulary, but also how accurate your vocabulary is. So in this lecture, we're going to look at some of the most common lexical errors made in the speaking test and how we can avoid making these mistakes ourselves. Things that can go wrong with word formation. There can be mistakes with prefixes, the in, de, im, pre, anti that appear at the front of words. There can be mistakes with suffixes, the less, full, ation, ifi, itis, etc. that appears at the end of words. Now the issue here is that when we change from one suffix to another suffix, we often change to a different word class, and that can entirely change the meaning. So here are some of the most common mistakes I hear frequently in terms of word class when it comes to changing suffixes. I hate doing my homework. It's so bored. I need to fill my weekend with lots of activities. Otherwise, I'm really boring. That is a no-no. Definitely not. In the second sentence, you're actually telling everybody that you're no fun. You're a boring person. You would describe yourself as boring. Now, that's obviously not right, and we want to switch those two the other way around. My homework is boring. I'm really bored if I don't fill my weekend with activities. This is a problem of suffixes, as we just looked at a moment ago. Now, you describe something as boring. Now, that might help with the ing there. Something as boring. And you feel bored. Feeling. You feel bored. You describe something as boring. With this in mind, let's have a look at a couple of sentences, and I want you to see if you can locate the mistakes in these sentences as well as fix the mistakes. I'm really interested in archaeology. I love One thing I find really annoyed is the way that children these days spend all their time on their phones. No wonder they're so boring. I didn't do that well in my exams last year, which was a little Okay, let's have a look. First sentence. I'm really interested in archaeology. That's the feeling. Fascinating. The second sentence, talking about going on holiday, you would feel really excited. So excited, the feeling, as work has been so stressful recently. Notice the suffix doesn't always conform to the previous rule that we talked about. In this case, stress is followed up with a full, stressful, not stressed or stressing. Stressful is how you would describe the experience. And at the end there, we have another feeling. You can even see the verb feel. I can't wait to feel more relaxed. So ed on the end. One thing I find really annoying, notice you're finding it, I mean you describe it as something, you find it really annoying, is the way that children these days spend all their time on their phones. No wonder they are so bored. The children feel bored. Now, you could actually say that the children are boring, but it would change the meaning, but it actually makes sense in this sentence because you can say that people who spend all their time on phones are not fun to be around. They're quite boring. So either one works there. Now, next one. I didn't do that well in my exams. That was disappointing. So you could say that I was disappointed. That would be okay. But you are using which was. The which is a non-defining relative clause. We have a relative pronoun which essentially replaces not doing well in your exams. Not doing well in your exams is an experience, not a feeling. The experience we describe as disappointing. Okay? And the ending there, I hope to do better this year as I'm a lot more engaged. ED, because you've got I'm, so you've got that feeling. I am engaged. And the last one, of course, hopefully this is true. I love IELTS. Maybe it's not true. It's so enjoyable. Again, we're just changing that suffix at the end there. It's not similar to the other ones, but we're describing something. We're not reporting a feeling. It's so enjoyable. The other issue, particularly when it comes to part 2, is a lack of precision. So if we think about the band descriptors, and if we come to band 8 for a moment, in order to achieve a band 8 in lexical resource, the speaker must use vocabulary to convey precise meanings. What does this really mean? I think that my secondary school was quite disappointing, which could be down to the lack of passionate teachers and high quality facilities. Now both sentences are grammatically accurate, they're both quite fluent, and of course my pronunciation's okay, and the vocabulary here is accurate, all the word formations are appropriate. But hopefully you can see that that second sentence provides a much clearer image in the listener's mind, and that's because of the precision of the vocabulary. We're painting a much clearer picture. So that second sentence, much stronger because it uses vocabulary to convey precise meanings. How do we do this then? Well, there are a couple of ways we can fix this issue when it comes to defining things, and that's where we need the most precision. The first thing you can do is to acknowledge all of the adjectives that you are too dependent on, that you are too reliant on. Here are some of the most common. You may have a few of your own. Try to notice them when they appear. Are okay, they are fine. It's very natural to say these words and say them fairly regularly. If you worry too much about paraphrasing these words, you'll probably become a little bit unnatural in your speech. However, if we want to be more precise and shoot for that Band 8 score, we may need to think about explaining further and using more precise adjectives. Let's have a look at what I mean. Now, I want you to look at some of these sentences and consider how you would make them more precise, how you would paint a clearer picture. The last holiday I took was to Tenerife. It was nice. We had very good weather. My favourite film is probably Titanic. I think it's great. It's very exciting and I love the characters. My least favourite subject at school was definitely maths. It was just too hard. I'm really not very good at maths. Now, pause the video for a moment and just think about how you would create a clearer picture for the examiner with more precise vocabulary. And when you're ready, then play the video again. Okay, let's have a look. Identifying the words there that we noticed on the previous slide. They're very common. Nice, good, great, exciting, hard, good, again. Let's see if we can modify them. The last holiday I took was to Tenerife. We had a brilliant time there, thanks to the sun shining down on us all week. I don't think I saw a single cloud. So we're coming away from a reliance on single adjectives, and we're choosing instead to paint a clearer picture using descriptions. Sensory language in particular is very good. The sun shining down, you can imagine the heat, you can imagine the sight of a single cloud, or there not being a single cloud. Very, very useful to use. Time we're still relying on adjectives, but the adjectives are a lot more complex and they demonstrate a much wider range of our vocabulary while at the same time painting a clearer picture. The final one here, my least favourite subject at school was definitely maths. I found that subject really difficult. Anything related to logic, algorithms and sums has always been a struggle for me. Now the first modification is quite a simple. And we actually change the language at the end there to use a noun rather than an adjective. So we say a struggle. Now you can do the same thing. This won't be possible for you to do on the spot on exam day without practice. So you must take the time to practice this, particularly in part 2 when you have the time to stop and think for a moment and really try and paint a very clear picture using all of those 120 seconds that you have. Now the final way of improving precision, or the second way I should say of improving precision, is to avoid describing things with negations. What do I mean by this? I mean are. Now this is a flawed approach really because it limits your vocabulary, it limits the detail that you can provide. Instead, we want to avoid those negations. The film was pretty terrible. Add a little bit more information as well, with lifeless characters and a boring plot. My home is quite small, though it feels cozy and homely to me. Notice the contrast there. The experience was really dull. I could barely keep my eyes open. The shirt was pretty affordable. It was on sale, so I got it for a bargain. The holiday is going to be quite short, as we only have time for a city break. Okay, so plenty of ways that we can avoid negation and provide more detail and precision. Final thing I want to talk about is when you don't know a word, and the most important thing that you must do is not panic. If you forget a word, do not panic. It's a very common occurrence. It happens to native speakers as well. You can't really help it. As long as you would do it like this. Here's an example. When I was younger, I used to do a sport called hockey, which involves two teams with hockey sticks trying to put I'm sorry, the word seems to have escaped me. Okay, I'm sorry, the word seems to have escaped me. Or sorry, I seem to have forgotten the word. Sorry, I seem to have forgotten the word. But it involves putting a flat, round use the language I've provided here, and then just try to describe the word as best you can.